A river system that survived 3 full-scale wars is now being treated as a weapon, and the implications stretch across 2 nuclear-armed rivals and 1 increasingly assertive neighbor to the north. For more than 60 years, the Indus Waters Treaty stood as proof that India and Pakistan could cooperate on something even while fighting over everything else. That proof is now in serious question, and the consequences reach far beyond the 2 countries that signed the agreement in September 1960. The treaty itself was a product of Cold War-era diplomacy, brokered by the World Bank after nearly a decade of negotiation. It split the 6 rivers of the Indus Basin so that India received control over the eastern rivers, the Ravi, Beas, and Sutlej, representing roughly 20% of total water flow, while Pakistan secured rights to the much larger western rivers, the Indus, Jhelum, and Chenab, which together carry close to 80% of the basin's water. The World Bank also financed a massive replacement canal system, one of the largest irrigation engineering projects of the 20th century, that allowed Pakistan to redirect water after losing direct access to the eastern rivers. For Pakistan, this arrangement is not a convenience. Nearly 80% of its irrigated agriculture depends on the Indus system, a sector that accounts for roughly 1/5 of national GDP and employs close to 40% of the national workforce. Around 90% of the country's food production traces back to this single river basin, and nearly 300 million people across the wider basin depend on it in some form. Any serious disruption is not a diplomatic inconvenience for Islamabad. It is an existential economic and food security threat. For decades, the friction between the 2 countries centered on narrow technical disputes, mostly involving Indian hydroelectric projects built on the western rivers that the treaty still permits India to use for what are called run-of-the-river facilities. These are designed to generate electricity without creating large-scale reservoirs. The 2 projects at the center of today's dispute are the Kishanganga Dam on the Neelum River, with a capacity of 330 megawatts, and the Ratle hydroelectric project on the Chenab River, rated at 850 megawatts. Pakistan has argued for years that both projects include storage capacity and deep, low-level sluice gates that exceed what run-of-the-river design should require, giving India the physical ability to hold back or release water at politically sensitive moments, particularly during sowing season when even short delays can damage entire harvests, or during monsoon peaks when sudden releases could worsen downstream flooding. New Delhi has consistently denied this, insisting the projects meet treaty specifications and cannot meaningfully alter the volume reaching Pakistan because of strict storage limits written into the original agreement. What has changed recently is far more serious than an engineering argument. Following the 2025 Pahalgam terrorist attack, India placed the Indus Waters Treaty in abeyance, citing national security concerns and calling for a full renegotiation to reflect what officials describe as a transformed strategic environment shaped by cross-border terrorism, population growth, and rising water demand. Pakistan rejects this move outright, arguing the treaty contains no exit clause allowing unilateral suspension and remains binding under international law regardless of bilateral tensions, a position Islamabad has repeated at nearly every diplomatic forum available to it since the suspension. This disagreement has produced a strange and unprecedented legal standoff. Pakistan took its case to the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague, which asserted jurisdiction over the Kishanganga and Ratle disputes despite India's objections, and later issued rulings imposing tighter restrictions on Indian water storage practices while reinforcing hydrological data sharing obligations. India has refused to recognize that court's authority, calling the proceedings legally invalid, and continues to engage only through the treaty's separate neutral expert mechanism. The result is 2 parallel legal tracks running at the same time, each recognized by only one side, effectively paralyzing any single authoritative path to resolution. Meanwhile, the routine data sharing that has functioned since 1960 through the Permanent Indus Commission, the treaty's core administrative body, has slowed considerably, leaving Pakistan with less advance warning about upstream reservoir operations and seasonal flow changes, complicating both farming decisions and flood preparedness for a population numbering well over 240 million. The regional weight of this dispute becomes clearer once China enters the picture. Beijing controls the headwaters of several rivers that eventually feed South Asian systems, and it has its own long-running disputes with India over Himalayan water resources, including large-scale hydropower projects on the Brahmaputra, one of which is reported to involve a planned capacity exceeding 60,000 megawatts, making it potentially the largest hydropower installation in the world. Analysts have noted that India's approach to the Indus Waters Treaty could set a precedent that China might eventually cite to justify its own upstream leverage over India. In a region already defined by the India-Pakistan rivalry and unresolved India-China border tensions along the roughly 3,400-kilometer line of actual control, any erosion of established water-sharing norms risks legitimizing water as a tool of coercive statecraft rather than a shared resource governed by binding agreements between roughly 1.4 billion and 240 million people respectively. Climate change adds another layer of instability that the original treaty architects in 1960 could not have anticipated. The Hindu Kush-Himalayan range, sometimes called the third pole for holding the largest ice reserves outside the polar regions, feeds much of the Indus system, and scientific estimates suggest its glaciers could lose a significant share of their volume by the end of the century if current warming trends continue. Combined with increasingly erratic monsoon behavior, this has already produced extremes on both ends of the spectrum, from Pakistan's catastrophic 2022 floods that submerged roughly one-third of the country and caused damages estimated at over $30 billion, to recurring droughts in other years that strain agricultural planning across the basin. A treaty built for a period of relatively predictable river flows now has to manage a hydrological reality it was never designed for. What happens next carries real weight for the region. If India moves toward constructing additional storage capacity on the western rivers under the justification of national security, Pakistan could face reduced and less predictable water availability precisely during critical planting and harvest windows. Either way, the Indus Waters Treaty is no longer simply a water-sharing arrangement between two neighbors. It has become a barometer for whether South Asia's two nuclear-armed powers can still manage shared resources through law rather than leverage, and whether that answer carries lessons for the broader, increasingly crowded water politics of the entire Himalayan region.